Well, good morning. It is good to be here with you all. I am John Sievering. I'm the associate pastor here at St. Andrews, and I just want to say welcome to those of you who are in the building, and for those of you who are at home, I just want to say, Alexa, play Baby Shark. You'll have to tell me later if that works. So I've been here for about 15 months, and I feel like I have now waited long enough to wax poetic about going to a Husker football game. Have you been to a Huskers football game? Yeah. For those of you who have attended a game at Memorial Stadium, you know that there is something special about the moment right before the game begins. The players begin to walk through the tunnel, and the dulcet tones of the Alan Parsons Project start to float through the stadium. There's something electric in the air, and the hair on the back of your neck stands up right as a group of fighter jets fly directly over the stadium in formation. The roar of the jet engines gripping your chest. And out of the corner of your eye, you see a ripple of humanity as a sea of red starts to undulate and then wave, and it gets closer and closer, and without thinking, without planning, you spring to your feet and throw your hands into the air along with 91,000 of your closest personal friends. There's something special about being in that mass of humanity, being in a huge group who are all in one heart and one who are all wanting the same thing. There's something about being part of a crowd, being part of something bigger than yourself, being swept away by what those around us are doing. And I want you to keep that in mind as we read our passage this morning. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5, starting with verse 1. You may be familiar with this passage because it's what Pastor Chris preached on last week, and we decided that some of you didn't hear it, so we're going to preach it again. That's not true. We're going to be looking at some different aspects of this text, look at some different things that are going on in it, and remember to keep the tunnel walk in your mind as we're thinking about this. Mark chapter 5, starting with verse 1. They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, stampeded down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man possessed by demons sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen what had happened to the man possessed by demons and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. May God bless the reading and hearing of just a portion of God's word. Now, again, we talked last week about how truly bizarre this story is in so many ways. But there's a really specific bizarreness that I want you to pay attention to today. There's a really specific weirdness that I want you to hear, and that is the reaction of the people in town to what had happened when the man was healed, when the man was liberated. What was their reaction to him? When they saw him sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, they were afraid. Why were the people still afraid? If what they were afraid of was how he was howling and hurting himself, if what they were afraid of was his nakedness, if what they were afraid of out of his mind, then when he was healed, when he was liberated, why were they still afraid? Now, I don't know and I can't prove this, but I believe that they were afraid because they saw that he was just like them. And when they saw that, they were afraid of what they had done to him. When they could tell themselves, well, this person is possessed, this person is crazy, he's out of his mind, he's out there howling like an animal, hurting himself with stones, he's living in the wilderness, not just in the wilderness, he's out there in the cemetery among the tombs. There is something wrong, and he is not like us. When they could tell themselves that, they could justify how they had treated him. But when they saw him there, clothed and in his right mind, they were afraid because they saw that he was just like them. And they realized that they had been treating him as less than human, as other, as different, as not one of us. And they were ashamed. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not particularly enjoy it when people point out that I have done something wrong or I have been treating someone poorly. I do not respond well to that kind of feedback. But there's a really interesting passage, I think, that helps us understand what particularly it was that Jesus was trying to accomplish and what Jesus accomplished not just for the man, but for the crowd. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." Now that's a little bit of high-flown language. The cosmic powers of this present darkness, what does that even mean? I'm going to show you here in just a second. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to try an experiment. And truth be told, this makes me a little nervous. Last time I tried an experiment, I almost impaled Sue Russia on a coffee mug. And I still feel terrible about that, by the way. I'm so sorry. The handle broke. I didn't even throw the mug. Just the handle broke and the rest of the mug flew. But this is a much less dangerous one, I hope. So who here has done the wave? Oh, perfect. You're already practicing. That's great. All right. If you have done the wave, what we are going to do is we are going to attempt a wave both in the building and at home today, okay? So if you are at home, what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you are someplace you can stand up and arms, if at all possible. If you are lying on your bed watching this on your phone, you're going to have to at least sit up or at least give us a hand wave or something when it crosses the middle. And what I would like to happen, I'm so nervous about this. What I would like to happen is I'm going to have somebody over on this side start. And I just want you to, when I say go, stand up, raise your hands. As the wave gets closer, raise your hands along with them. And I want the wave to go all the way across and all the way back. We're going to try it one time. Are you ready? Okay, I saw some people sitting forward, but I did not hear anyone at all say yes. Which makes me very nervous. Are you all ready? Yes. All right, go. And back. Oh, very nice, very nice. Okay, that was actually truly impressive. So I want you to notice what you did and did not do when you were part of the wave. You didn't think, okay, at precisely this time, this number of seconds after the wave starts, I am going to stand. I'm going to throw my hands up into the air, and then I'm going to immediately sit back down. You didn't time it out perfectly. You didn't watch your clock. You didn't have your time on your cell phone. It wasn't something you decided to do. You just did it. You saw, you felt the people all around you moving in concert. And as the wave of people got closer and closer, you experienced this urge, this desire to stand with them. And as the wave crested near you, you jumped to your feet. It's almost like a real wave in the ocean. You didn't move of your own volition, by your own decision, but almost as if you were moved by the wave itself. Who was controlling the wave? I didn't control the wave. I told you we were going to do it, but once you got ready, who started it? Someone over in this area. There were definitely 4 or 5 people who jumped up at similar times, but there wasn't one particular person who said, yes, I am starting this. It is going to be at this time. Synchronize watches and go. No one decided how fast it should move. No one decided how fast it should come back. Now, the scientific term for this is emergence, which is the tendency of complex organizations or systems to exhibit behaviors or characteristics that the individual parts of the organization don't have. Now, if you fell asleep a little bit there, it's okay. I did while I was writing it too. I apologize for that. But it's important. This is something called emergence, which means that there are going to be characteristics. There are going to be things that happen in complex groups of people that do not happen with individuals. There was no one person guiding or moving the wave. I did not have to point for you all to know that as the wave got closer, you were going to be a part of it. When you walk into Memorial Stadium, you didn't decide when you were going to throw up your hands. You didn't watch your watch and make sure you knew that exactly at 2:34, right when the Huskers were really going to need you as they went behind by 28, that you were going to spontaneously stand and throw your hands into the air. But when you walk through the gates into the stadium, even before that, when you bought your tickets and when you picked out the red clothing that you were going to wear, you made the decision to be a part of something bigger than yourself. To give just a little bit of yourself to something bigger, to something greater. To give just a little bit of your decision to act to someone or something other than yourself. Something not yourself. And that's what the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6 calls the powers and principalities. Groups of people, systems that individuals were part of, but we're not making individual decisions about. We're being moved to do things by this group or by this system. And there were a number of these systems at work on the man who was possessed by an unclean spirit. A number of these powers at work. And the first was social powers. Notice where we find this man. He was outside the city in the wilderness. Now, I don't think we quite understand by what they mean when they say that he was in the wilderness. I particularly, as an individual, enjoy the wilderness. I like to go out into the woods. I like to go camping. I like to go canoeing and kayaking. I like to get just lost enough that I am concerned for about an hour or two and then can find my way back again. Because I know that I have GPS on my phone, and I know that there are groups of people that would come looking for me if I got well and truly lost. And so, like Daniel Boone, I am not lost. I've just been a mite bewildered once or twice. But when they talk about the wilderness in Scripture, they are talking about being outside the ordering power of civilization, and that was scary. There was no one to come looking for you. There was no one who might be able to find you. When you were out past civilization, it was dangerous and it was scary. And it is unlikely that this man chose to go there by himself. He was forced to go there because the social powers did not want him to be within their community, did not want him to be a part of their town. And so he was pushed out. And the political powers were at work on this man as well. Notice that he was bound by chains, bound by shackles. Being bound by chains and shackles is actually not something that often happens spontaneously. Someone put him in chains and shackles. A human had to go and bind this man in chains. And even if one individual had decided that what this man needed was help and not chains, it wouldn't have mattered because the powers had somebody else that could do the job. There was always someone else to do the job. It wasn't just about one person making a bad decision. It was about the system, about the group of people, about the powers and the principalities. As Rene Girard says, the chains are never strong enough to convince their victim of their good intentions toward him. And he was also at the whim of the religious system. He wasn't just outside the city, he was among the tombs, which is even for us kind of a weird place to be spending the night, kind of a weird place to be spending your time. But notice that a cemetery among tombs was an unclean place for him to be. If he was out among unclean folks, among unclean people, it meant that he was not going to be allowed back into his community. He was not going to be welcomed or allowed back into his religious group. And so regardless of whatever else was going on with him, the fact that he had been in the presence of death would ostracize him from the community. And this was not a practical consideration. It was a religious mandate. This was, again, not something that people decided to do as individuals. It was something they believed that God was calling them to do. The people who were making sure that this man was not allowed back into the community believed they were doing God's work. This is the powers and principalities at work on this man. And we've seen the powers and principalities at work around us, right? Social powers in a social group that you have always wanted to be part of, always wanted to be allowed into, but somehow find yourself excluded from. Political powers, people cheering for their political team, trying to score points against opponents while the world burns. And religious powers. I, like many of you, have found myself in religious systems where I had to show up as a little less than myself, to tell less than the truth about what I believe, and occasionally in places where I felt like I might be crushed by the weight of the church's expectations of me and my inability to meet them. And often these religious and political and social powers mix and merge to make some of the most dangerous and violent powers of all. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and it's kind of funny, And so we can laugh at it at first, but I want you to hear this. There's a church in Jerusalem called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And there are 6 different religious groups who have been using this same church building for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they have had all kinds of conflict about what parts of the building they can use and about where they can go and when they can travel and what things they can move and change and what things they cannot. And there is a ladder set outside of a window on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Nobody knows exactly when it got there. Nobody knows who put it there. Nobody knows what it's for. But the first time it was seen in artwork of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in 1728. This ladder has been standing on this window since at least 1728, and nobody will move it because they're afraid of the conflict that it is going to start among the groups. And this is not an idle question. In 2008, there was a portion of the roof on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that was claimed by 2 separate groups. And so one of the groups would have a monk sit in a chair on this spot on the roof day and night. There was at least one monk sitting in this chair to make sure that everyone would know that this part of the church building had been claimed by this particular group. And on a hot day in Jerusalem, on the roof of a building, the monk who happened to be sitting in the chair that day got too hot, moved about 6 inches into the shade. And it started such a conflict that 11 monks were hospitalized. Now that's funny. That's also sad. That these people who were there trying to do God's work, those people who were there trying to be part of the church, those people who had set themselves aside for prayer and worship, were so protective, were so territorial over this physical spot of ground that a 6-inch movement of a chair hospitalized 11 people. We've all seen the powers at work around us. But I think if we are honest, we will admit that there are times when we ourselves have been part of the powers. When we have been not the man who is struggling with the legion, but one of the people in town who sees him clothed and in his right mind, and we too are afraid. We've been part of family and social groups. We've been part of political parties, movements that begin in seeking the good of others and end in accumulating power and scoring points. We've been part of religious powers trying to follow God, but doing it in ways that harm and exclude the most vulnerable among us. And how do we end up there? We end up there because, like the crowds around the man with legion, we are afraid. We're afraid that we're going to lose this fragile freedom that we believe we have carved out for ourselves. We're afraid that who and what we have given our lives and our energy and our effort and our ability to decide to is maybe not what we originally believed it was. And we are afraid of people that we do not know or understand. And so Jesus comes into this situation, and he doesn't just heal and liberate the man. He sends him back into his community and tells the man to tell everyone what God has done for him and the grace that God has shown to him so that the people would no longer be afraid. What does Jesus call us to when we are afraid? The first thing Jesus calls us to do is to embrace the freedom that Jesus offers, both for ourselves and for others. Galatians 5:1 says that it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And not just me as an individual, but all of us. Embrace the freedom that Jesus offers, both for us and for others. And second, be very mindful of who or what you give a part of yourself to. It's so easy today to be overwhelmed by the sheer number of people or groups telling us what to believe, what to buy, who to vote for, who to hate, who to be afraid of, who to exclude. And so we take shortcuts. We pick some person or group we trust and we follow, and we often don't ask the kinds of questions that we ought to. Be mindful of who or what you give a part of yourself to. And third, widen your circle. We all have an inner circle of people that are most important to us, the people that we would absolutely step in front of a bullet for, the people that we love and cherish, and that is right and good for us to have that. But the further we get out from that inner circle, the more we tend to see the people as less and less worthy of our care and concern. And Jesus goes right to the heart of this when he says, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." Every person you come into contact with is a beloved child of God and worthy of our care and our concern. Now, I'm going to do a very dangerous thing, and I'm going to mention Richard Nixon. I'm just warning you so that when I do it, you're not surprised. In 1973, Richard Nixon was under fire. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, had already resigned due to allegations and proof of corruption. And this was actually before anyone was implicated in the Watergate break-in. And there was a fascinating prayer at a public event by a lawyer and a public theologian named William Stringfellow. William Stringfellow infamously prayed an exorcism over Richard Nixon. Now, this sounds bizarre, I get that, but I want you to hear me out. William Stringfellow recognized that the corruption and the immorality was bigger than just one person. It was the powers and principalities at work in an individual person. And so rather than choose to hate the individual, Stringfellow prayed for the liberation, prayed for the freedom, prayed for the goodness of someone he might have considered his enemy. In short, William Stringfellow loved him. May we go and do the same. Would you all pray with me? Good and gracious God, we are so thankful for the example of Jesus. We are grateful for the healing and liberation that Jesus offers to us, God, but we recognize that sometimes we find ourselves on the inside looking out. We find ourselves looking on the inside, looking out at the person who has been hurt and excluded, and it is all too easy for us to desire our own freedom and not the freedom of the other. God, I ask that you would break our hearts. I ask that you would break our hearts for the people who are hurting, and I ask that you would give us courage not to be afraid, but to love not just our neighbors, but to love our enemies as well. God, we love you and trust you, and we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.